I'm Anna, 29, female, and my parents forged my signature for a $450,000 loan to buy my brother's dream home. It's a sentence that still feels foreign on my tongue, like a line from a dramatic movie, not the quiet, architect-designed life I had so carefully built for myself. The betrayal wasn't a sudden storm. It was a rot that had been spreading through the foundations of my family for years. I just hadn't been willing to see it until the floorboards finally gave way beneath me. My husband, Tom, and I live in a modest but comfortable home 2 hours away from my parents, Robert and Mary, and my younger brother, Chris. Tom is a high school history teacher, a man whose patience and quiet strength have always been my anchor. We are planners. We save, we budget, we build. Our life is a blueprint we follow with care. My family, on the other hand, operates on whims and crises, most of them centered around Chris. Chris is 26 but has the life experience of a teenager perpetually waiting for his big break. My parents see him as a misunderstood creative genius. I see him as a man who has never had to face a single consequence. This dynamic, the responsible daughter and the golden child son, wasn't a recent development. It was the bedrock of our family. I remember my first car with perfect clarity. It was a 10-year-old sedan, purchased with money I'd saved from 2 years of working a weekend job at a local diner. I was 18, and I needed it for my internship at an architecture firm. I spent weeks researching, negotiating, and finally, driving it home with a sense of pride so immense it felt like I could float. My dad, Robert, clapped me on the back and said, "That's my girl, earning her own way." 3 years later, Chris got his first car. It was a brand new SUV with a giant red bow on the hood, waiting for him in the driveway on the morning of his 21st birthday. He hadn't graduated from the expensive private art school they were funding yet, nor did he have a job. When I asked my mom, Mary, about it, she gave me a weary smile. "Oh, you know your brother, Anna. He needs something reliable to get his portfolio around to galleries. It's an investment in his future." I looked at my own reliable, paid-for car in the street and felt the first, sharp sting of injustice. My achievement was a responsibility, his was an investment. The pattern repeated itself endlessly. When it came time for college, I was gently but firmly steered towards a state university where I had secured a partial scholarship. "It's just practical, honey," Dad had said. "You're so smart, you'll shine anywhere. No sense in racking up all that debt." They were right, and I worked hard, graduating with honors and minimal loans. Then it was Chris's turn. He decided he wanted to be a sculptor, and the only place he could possibly find his artistic voice was a private college with a tuition that made my eyes water. My parents didn't hesitate. They took out a second mortgage on their home. "You can't put a price on a dream, Anna," was their justification. My practicality was expected. His dreams were priceless. Perhaps the most telling incident happened a few years ago. We were supposed to take a family vacation, the first in years. The plan, which I had helped coordinate, was a week at a quiet lake house, boating, hiking, family dinners. It was meant to be a relaxing trip for all of us. We arrived on a Saturday. By Sunday afternoon, Chris was bored. He discovered a multi-day music festival was happening 3 states away and became obsessed with the idea of going. My parents exchanged a look I knew all too well, the "how do we make this happen for Chris?" look. Within hours, our relaxing vacation was dismantled. The lake house was abandoned, bags were repacked, and we were all crammed into the car for a 10-hour drive to a muddy field. Tom, ever the good sport, tried to make the best of it, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. I spent 3 days sleeping in a tent, surrounded by crowds and noise, all because my 24-year-old brother had a whim. On the drive back, my mom turned to me from the passenger seat, her voice bright and oblivious. "Wasn't that a wonderful, spontaneous adventure? It's so important to support your brother's passions." I just stared out the window, the word support feeling less like a loving gesture and more like a heavy chain. My desires were secondary, my comfort was negotiable, but my brother's fleeting passions were sacred. So, when I sat at their dining room table for our regular Sunday dinner, I shouldn't have been surprised. I should have seen the anvil hovering in the air. But even after a lifetime of playing second fiddle, I could never have prepared myself for the magnitude of the betrayal that was about to be served up alongside my mother's pot roast. The Sunday dinner started like any other. The air in my parents' house was thick with the scent of roasted vegetables and my mother's perfume. A low murmur of classy Cal music played from the small speaker in the corner of the dining room. Everything was designed to project an image of perfect, placid domesticity. Tom and I had arrived with a bottle of wine, and my mother had kissed us both on the cheek, her smile as bright and brittle as porcelain. My father, Robert, sat at the head of the table, holding court as always. He talked about his golf game, about a neighbor's gaudy new lawn ornament, about the rising price of everything. My brother, Chris, sat across from me, scrolling on his phone, occasionally chiming in with a noncommittal or wow, that's crazy. He had a new haircut that must have cost a fortune, and he wore a designer t-shirt, the very picture of a man living a life funded by someone else. I tried to engage, asking my mom about her book club and my dad about his retirement projects. It was our familiar dance, a carefully choreographed performance of a happy family. I played my part, the dutiful daughter, while Tom, my loving husband, played his, the polite son-in-law. We passed the gravy and complimented the food, all while the unspoken tensions of our family history simmered just below the surface. So, my father said, setting his fork and knife down with a deliberate clatter that made us all look up. He had a wide, self-satisfied grin on his face. He exchanged a glance with my mother, who beamed back at him, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Your mother and I have some absolutely wonderful news." I felt a familiar clench in my stomach. These grand announcements rarely involved me and were almost always a prelude to some new, expensive chapter in Chris's life that I would be expected to applaud. "Don't keep them in suspense, Robert," my mother urged, her hands clasped together on the table. Chris finally looked up from his phone, a flicker of interest in his eyes. He knew this was about him. My dad puffed out his chest. "Well, as you know, Chris has been working so hard to get his career off the ground." I nearly choked on my water. Chris's version of working hard involved creating a few digital art pieces that he tried to sell as NFTs before the market crashed, and then complaining that the world didn't appreciate his genius. And we decided it was time he had a proper place to live and work, a place that reflects his potential. "We bought Chris a house," my mother blurted out, unable to contain herself any longer. The words hung in the air. A house, not an apartment, not a condo, a house, for a man with no job and no income. "Wow," Tom said, recovering first. That's a big step. Congratulations, Chris." Chris was grinning now, a broad, triumphant smile. "Thanks, man, it's sick. 5 bedrooms, a huge yard for a studio space. It's in the Oakwood Hills neighborhood." My blood ran cold. Oakwood Hills was one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city. The houses there started at close to $1 million. How on earth could they have managed that? My father was a retired sales manager and my mother a retired office administrator. They lived comfortably on their pensions and savings, but they weren't wealthy enough to buy a house in Oakwood Hills outright. The math didn't add up. I found my voice, though it felt thin and distant. "A house? How did you afford that?" My father's smile didn't waver. He looked at me as if I were a child asking a charmingly simple-minded question. "Well, that's the other part of the good news, Anna. We had a little help." He looked at me directly, his eyes holding mine. There was a confidence in his gaze that terrified me. It was the look of a man who believed he had every right in the world to do what he had done. "We were able to secure a loan," he said, his voice casual, as if he were discussing the weather. "A sizable one, enough for the down payment and then some. The bank was very accommodating." My mother picked up the thread, her tone just as breezy. "The paperwork was a bit of a hassle, but we got it all sorted out last week. It's all approved. Chris moves in next month." I stared at them, a roaring sound filling my ears. A loan. They had taken out another loan, bigger than the one for Chris's college, bigger than the second mortgage. How? Their age, their fixed income, no bank would approve a loan of that magnitude for them. Unless. The pieces began to click into place, each one a cold, heavy weight dropping into the pit of my stomach. The way my father was looking at me, the talk of help, the sheer impossibility of it all. "What bank?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "First National Trust," my dad said proudly. "The same bank I used. The same bank that held my mortgage, my business accounts, my entire financial life. The bank that knew my credit score was pristine, the result of a decade of hard work and fiscal discipline." The room started to feel like it was tilting. Tom must have seen the color drain from my face because he reached for my hand under tea. Table. His touch was a distant pressure point in a world that was rapidly losing its focus. "And whose name," I asked, my heart pounding a sick, slow rhythm against my ribs, "is on the loan?" My father's smile finally faltered. He seemed almost annoyed, as if I were spoiling the triumphant moment with tedious details. He cleared his throat. "Well, this is where you come in, Anna. We knew you'd want to help. Family helps family." He leaned forward, his expression turning serious, paternal. It was the face he used when he was about to explain a hard truth for my own good. "It's your responsibility to help," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "You're in a wonderful position, so successful. We just used your name to secure the financing. It was just a formality, really. To get the best interest rate. We'll all pitch in to make the payments, of course." The world stopped. The classical music, the clinking of cutlery, the hum of the refrigerator, it all faded into a deafening silence. In that moment, the dining room was no longer a place of warmth and family. It was a crime scene, and I was the victim. They hadn't just asked me for money. They hadn't even co-signed a loan with me. They had taken my name, my identity, my future, and signed it away without my knowledge or consent. Forgery. Fraud. A loan for $450,000, a debt that would cripple me for the next 30 years, was now tied around my neck like a millstone. I looked from my father's stern, expectant face to my mother's hopeful, pleading smile. I looked at my brother, who was now avoiding my gaze, suddenly fascinated by a spot on the tablecloth. They had all known. They had conspired to do this, believing so completely in their right to my life, my success, that they saw nothing wrong with it. It was my responsibility. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't say a word. A terrifying calm washed over me, the kind that comes after the worst possible thing has happened. I felt strangely detached, as if I were floating above my own body, watching this quiet, devastating scene unfold. I stayed silent, my hand gripping Tom's under the table like a lifeline, and in that silence I made a decision. I let them believe my silence was acceptance. I let them finish their dinner in a state of self-congratulatory bliss. And as soon as I was in the car, I took out my phone and called my lawyer. The drive home was a blur of streetlights smearing across the passenger side window. Neither Tom nor I spoke for the first 20 minutes. The silence in the car was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. It was filled with the words my father had said, echoing over and over in my head. "It's your responsibility to help. My responsibility." As if I were a utility, a resource to be tapped, not a person. Tom drove with both hands on the wheel, his knuckles white. He kept glancing at me, his face a mask of concern and barely suppressed rage. Finally, as we turned onto our quiet, tree-lined street, he pulled the car over to the curb, switched off the engine, and turned to face me. "Anna," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "talk to me. What's going on in your head right now?" The dam broke. The terrifying calm I'd felt at the dinner table shattered, and a wave of raw, unfiltered emotion crashed over me. "They didn't even ask, Tom," I whispered, the words ragged. "They just took it. They took my name, like it was theirs to use. $450,000, our future, the firm I want to start, the family we want to have. It's all tied to Chris's 5-bedroom mansion now." Tears I hadn't even realized were forming started to stream down my cheeks. And they were so proud of themselves. They smiled and told me it was my responsibility. Like I'm not their daughter, I'm just a line of credit. Tom's expression hardened. This isn't about responsibility, Anna. This is a crime. What they did is illegal. It's called fraud. I know, I said, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. But they're my parents, my brother. The words tasted like ash. How do you reconcile the people who raised you with the people who would so casually destroy you? He reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and steady. They stopped being just your parents when they forged your signature. Now they're people who committed a felony against you. We have to treat this for what it is. When we got inside, the familiar comfort of our home felt tainted. I walked through the living room we'd painted together, past the bookshelves Tom had built, and felt a profound sense of violation. This space, our sanctuary, was suddenly at risk. This life we had so carefully constructed was now tethered to my family's monstrous entitlement. I sank onto the sofa, my body feeling impossibly heavy. What do we do? First things first, Tom said, his teacher voice kicking in, calm and methodical. We confirm it. We can't go off just their word. We need to know for sure that this loan exists. He was right. A small, desperate part of me was still clinging to the hope that it was all a misunderstanding. A terrible, cruel joke, or perhaps they were exaggerating. Maybe they'd only put my name down as a reference. My hands trembled as I pulled up the website for First National Trust on my laptop. I logged into my online banking portal, my heart pounding with each keystroke. And there it was. Under the Loans tab, nestled right below my own modest mortgage, was a new, terrifying entry. Loan type, personal line of credit. Account holder, Anna M. my last name. Balance, $450,000. Status approved, funds disbursed. The screen seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Funds disbursed. The money was already gone. It was in an account they controlled, ready to be handed over for the closing on Chris's house. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the coffee table. It's real, I choked out. Tom, it's real. He came and knelt in front of me, taking the laptop and placing it aside. He looked me straight in the eyes. Okay, it's real. Now we fight it. How? My mind was a maelstrom of fear and confusion. If I fight it, what happens to them? To my parents? What happens to us if you do? He countered, his voice unwavering. Anna, this is not a debt we can absorb. This would ruin us. This would change our entire lives. We would be working for the next 30 years to pay for Chris's dream. He was right. The anger, which had been simmering beneath the shock and grief, began to boil. My anger at my parents for their betrayal, at my brother for his parasitic selfishness, and at myself for not seeing this coming, for always giving them the benefit of that. My resolve hardened. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my life, my identity. They had stolen a part of me, and I had to get it back. I stood up and walked into our home office. Tom followed, watching me wordlessly. I found the business card my friend had given me a year ago after she'd gone through a contentious contract dispute. A lawyer. I had tucked it away, never thinking I'd need it, especially not for something like this. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely read the numbers. I took a deep breath, then another. I thought of my 10-year-old sedan, of the state school tuition, of the hijacked vacation. I thought of a lifetime of being told my needs were secondary. And then I thought of my father's face, full of righteous certainty, as he told me it was my responsibility to be their financial mule. I dialed the number. It went to an after-hours voicemail. I almost hung up, but then the automated voice prompted me to leave a message. Hello, I began, my voice cracking before I cleared my throat and started again, stronger this time. My name is Anna. I need to schedule an urgent consultation. I believe I am the victim of significant identity theft and loan fraud. The perpetrators are my parents. Hanging up the phone, I felt a profound shift inside me. The daughter who always tried to please, who swallowed her own disappointment to keep the peace, was gone. In her place was a woman who was about to find out just how much she was willing to fight for her own life. The love I had for my family was still there, a painful, grieving ache in my chest. but for the first time ever, it was being eclipsed by the fierce, desperate need for self-preservation. The lawyer's office was on the 15th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The view from the waiting room was panoramic, a sweeping vista of the city I had worked so hard to become a part of. As an architect, I appreciated the clean lines of the buildings, the intricate grid of the streets below. It was a world of order, of rules and consequences. It felt a world away from the chaotic, emotional mess of my family. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor greeted us. "Anna, I'm Catherine Davis. Please come in." Her office was immaculate, organized, and blessedly calm. Tom and I sat in the leather chairs opposite her large mahogany desk. For the first time in 48 hours, I felt like I could breathe. "Your message said this was urgent," Catherine began, folding her hands on the desk. "And that it involves your parents. Why don't you start from the beginning?" I recounted the story, my voice surprisingly steady. I laid out the history of favoritism, the Sunday dinner announcement, the shock, the discovery of the loan in my online banking portal. I had printed out a screenshot, which I pushed across the desk towards her. Catherine listened without interruption, her expression neutral but attentive. She picked up the printout and studied it, her eyes narrowing slightly. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. "Let me be perfectly clear, Anna," she said, her voice cutting through the emotional fog. "What you have described is not a family dispute over money. This is a clear-cut case of aita. Entity theft, bank fraud, and forgery. These are all felonies." Hearing the words spoken with such clinical authority made it all brutally real. This wasn't a misunderstanding I could smooth over. This was a crime. "Your parents," she continued, "forged your signature on federal banking documents to fraudulently obtain a loan for $450,000. The fact that they are your parents is emotionally devastating for you, but legally, it's irrelevant. They broke serious laws." Tom reached over and squeezed my hand. "So what are her options?" he asked. Catherine leaned back in her chair. "Broadly speaking, you have two paths. Path one is you do nothing. You implicitly accept the loan. You will be legally responsible for repaying the entire $450,000, plus interest, over the next 30 years. The bank will come after you for the payments, and if you default, they will ruin your credit, garnish your wages, and potentially seize your assets, including your home. This path effectively means you are choosing to let your parents and brother destroy your financial future." I felt sick. She was just putting words to the terror that had been swirling in my mind. "Path two," she went on, her gaze locked on mine, "is you fight back. You report the crime. This begins with filing a police report. You will state under oath that you did not authorize this loan and that your signature was forged. This is called a fraud affidavit. Once the police report is filed, we submit it along with our own legal notice to the bank's fraud department. The bank will then launch its own internal investigation." "And what happens then?" I asked, my throat dry. "If the bank determines that fraud occurred, they will absolve you of the debt. They will remove the loan from your credit history, and you will be made whole. The bank will then be the injured party, and they will be the ones who have lost the $450,000, and they will want to know who is responsible." Here it was, the moment of truth. What happens to my parents? Catherine's expression softened with a hint of sympathy, but her voice remained firm. "Once you file a police report for a felony, it's out of your hands. The police will investigate. The district attorney's office will look at the evidence, the forged documents, your testimony, the bank's records. Given the amount of money involved, it is highly likely that they will press charges against your parents. They could face arrest, a criminal trial, and, if convicted, potential jail time, though probation and hefty fines are more common for first-time offenders in cases like this. They will, at the very least, have a permanent criminal record." The image of my parents, Robert and Mary, being arrested, fingerprinted, their mugshots taken, it was horrifying. These were the people who had taught me to ride a bike, who had tucked me in at night. but they were also the people who had looked me in the eye and told me it was my duty to be their cash machine. They gave us a wedding gift, I said, the words sounding feeble even to my own ears. 2 years ago, $75,000. They mentioned it after they said they were just taking back what was theirs. Catherine shook her head, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. Anna, a gift is a gift. The moment they gave it to you, it became your money. It has zero legal bearing on the current situation. Their argument is emotionally manipulative, but in a court of law, it's meaningless. You cannot take back a gift by committing a felony. She leaned forward, her tone becoming gentle. I know this is an impossible decision. You're being asked to choose between your own future and your parents' freedom, but you need to understand that they created this choice. You didn't. They put you in this position with their greed and their profound sense of entitlement. Your only decision now is how you respond to it. We sat there for another hour, going over the details, the timelines, the potential outcomes. Tom asked sharp, practical questions while I mostly listened, the two paths laid out before me like a terrible fork in the road. One path led off a cliff, the other led through a fire, but on the other side was my life. My own, unburdened life. We left her office with a folder full of paperwork and a decision to make. As we rode the elevator down in silence, I looked at my reflection in the polished steel doors. I looked tired and small, but behind the fear in my eyes, something else was starting to grow. It was a cold, hard anger, an anger at being made to feel guilty for wanting to protect myself, an anger at being forced to choose between being a victim and being a daughter. By the time we reached the ground floor, I knew there was no real choice at all. They had built this crisis, brick by criminal brick. I was just the one who had to decide whether to let the whole rotten structure collapse on top of me or to be the one to push it over. Before I could walk into a police station and formally accuse my own parents of a crime, I had to do one last thing. I had to look them in the eye and give them one final chance to understand the gravity of what they had done. A desperate, foolish part of me still hoped that if I laid out the stark legal reality, they would see the abyss they were standing on the edge of and, for once, show some remorse. I needed to know, for my own peace of mind, that I had tried everything before I took the step that would shatter our family forever. Tom insisted on coming with me. "You're not doing this alone," he'd said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I'll be there for support, but I won't say a word unless you need me to. This is between you and them." The 2-hour drive to their house was the longest of my life. With every mile that passed, my stomach twisted itself into tighter knots. When we pulled into their driveway, I saw Chris's shiny SUV parked next to my father's sedan. They were all here. Good. I needed them all to hear this. My mother opened the door before I could even knock. Her face was wreathed in a tense, expectant smile. "Anna, we were wondering when you'd come to your senses. We're just about to open a bottle of champagne to celebrate Chris's new home." Her words, so full of oblivious cheer, were like a splash of cold water. They truly had no idea. They thought I was here to apologize, to accept my new role as the family bank. We stepped into the living room. My father was standing by the fireplace, a champagne bottle in hand. Chris was lounging on the sofa, looking smug. The scene was so grotesquely celebratory that my last flicker of hope died. "We're not here to celebrate," I said, my voice coming out stronger and colder than I expected. The smiles vanished from their faces. My mother's hands fluttered to her chest. "What's wrong? Anna, you look so serious." "I am serious, Mom," I said, planting my feet firmly on their plush carpet. "I'm here to talk about the loan." My father set the champagne bottle down with a thud. "It's all taken care of, Anna. Nothing for you to worry about. We've got it under control." "You've got it under control?" I let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of any humor. "You committed a felony in my name, and you think you have it under control? I met with a lawyer this morning." The word lawyer hung in the air, electric and dangerous. Chris sat up straight. My mother gasped. My father's face darkened with anger. "A lawyer?" he boomed, taking a step forward. "What on earth for? This is a family matter. You don't bring lawyers into family matters. Forging my signature on a $450,000 loan application isn't a family matter, Dad, I shot back, my voice rising to meet his. It's identity theft. It's bank fraud. Those are crimes. Real crimes with real consequences. My mother started to cry, her signature move in any confrontation. How can you be so cruel, Anna? We did this for your brother. We did this for the family. After everything we've done for you, that beautiful wedding we helped pay for. The wedding gift, I turned to her, my anger now a white-hot flame. The $75,000 you gave us, that was a gift, Mom. You don't get to use it as a justification for committing fraud 2 years later. That's not how it works. You're being selfish, Chris suddenly yelled from the sofa, his face red and blotchy. This is the first good thing that's ever happened to me. I finally have a chance to build my future, and you want to ruin it over some stupid paperwork. It's just money. It's not just money, Chris, I whirled on him. It's my money, my credit, my future, the one I worked for every single day while you were waiting for Mom and Dad to hand you your dreams on a silver platter. You think you're entitled to a $500,000 house? You're not entitled to anything you haven't earned. That is enough, my father roared, his voice shaking the room. He pointed a trembling finger at me. I will not have you speak to your brother that way in this house. We raised you to be a good daughter, a supportive sister. And this is how you repay us. With lawyers and accusations, we gave you everything. The sheer, blinding delusion of his statement staggered me. They hadn't given me everything. They had given Chris everything and sent me the bill. I looked at their faces, one by one. My mother, weeping with manipulative grief. My brother, radiating petulant entitlement. And my father, standing before me, cloaked in a mantle of righteous fury, utterly convinced of his own victimhood. There was no remorse, no understanding, no apology. There was only anger that their perfect plan had hit a snag. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry I had found out and was refusing to be a silent victim. I took a deep breath, the fiery anger inside me cooling into a solid, heavy core of certainty. I came here to give you a choice, I said, my voice now eerily calm. I was Goy. NG to ask you to go to the bank, to confess to the fraud, and to cancel the loan. I was hoping you would do the right thing to fix the mess you made. I paused, letting the words sink in. But I see now that was a waste of time. You don't even think you've made a mess. I looked directly at my father. The lawyer laid out 2 paths for me. Path 1 is I accept this loan and spend the next 30 years of my life paying for your choices. Path 2 is I report the crime. I file a police report. My mother let out a strangled sob. Anna, you wouldn't. You thought I wouldn't notice a $500,000 loan in my name, I countered coldly. You underestimated me then, and you're underestimating me now. I turned and walked towards the door, Tom right behind me. I didn't look back. If you walk out that door, you are no longer our daughter, my father shouted at my back. His words were meant to be a final, devastating blow, the ultimate threat, but they weren't, because the people in that room were not the parents I had loved and respected. They were strangers who wore my parents' faces. The family I had been trying to save was already gone. They had destroyed it themselves when they'd picked up a pen and forged my name. I opened the door and walked out into the cool afternoon air, not as their daughter, but as myself. And I knew exactly where I was going next. Leaving my parents' house felt like stepping out of a pressure cooker. The air outside was fresh and clean, a stark contrast to the toxic, suffocating atmosphere I had just left behind. There were no more tears left to cry. The confrontation had burned away all my grief and sadness, leaving behind only a cold, hard clarity. My path was clear. There was no turning back now. Tom drove, and I navigated us to the city's central police precinct. It was a large, imposing brick building that I had only ever driven past before. It seemed surreal that I was about to walk inside and file a report against my own family. Every instinct I'd been raised with screamed that this was wrong, that you don't air family secrets to the world. but the crime they had committed was so far beyond a family secret. It was a legal and financial time bomb, and I had to defuse it before it blew up my life. Walking through the automatic glass doors, I felt a tremor of fear run through me. The air inside smelled of disinfectant and paper. It was the sterile, impersonal smell of bureaucracy and trouble. We approached the front desk, where a uniformed officer with a tired expression looked up from his computer. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice flat. I need to report a crime," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "What kind of crimes?" I took a deep breath. Saying the words out loud felt like a betrayal in itself, a final, irrevocable act. Identity theft and loan fraud. The officer nodded, his expression unchanging. He'd heard it all before. "Okay, have a seat over there. A detective will be with you shortly." We sat on a hard plastic bench, the silence between us punctuated by the crackle of a police radio and the distant ringing of a phone. Tom put his arm around me. He didn't say anything, but his presence was a solid, comforting weight beside me. I leaned my head on his shoulder, trying to prepare myself for what was to come. I was about to cross a line I could never uncross. After what felt like an eternity, a man in a rumpled suit called my name. "Anna, I'm Detective Miller. Come on back." We followed him to a small, cluttered office. He gestured for us to sit as he settled in behind his desk. He had a kind, weary face, and he looked at me with an expression that was both professional and sympathetic. "The desk sergeant said you're here to report a fraud case," he said, opening a new file on his computer. "Tell me what happened." For the second time that day, I recounted the entire story. I told him about the Sunday dinner, the casual announcement, the specific amount of the loan, the bank's name. This time, however, I focused on the facts, just as Catherine Davis had advised. I explained that I had not been present for the loan application, that I had not signed any documents, and that I had not given anyone permission to use my name or my credit. Detective Miller typed as I spoke, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. He stopped me occasionally to ask for clarification. "What's your parents' full names and address? Your brother's name?" Giving him their information felt like handing over a weapon. I spelled out their names, my voice hollow. With each letter, I was cementing their fate and my own. When I finished, he printed out several pages and turned them around for me to review. It was my official statement, a sworn affidavit. "Read this carefully," he said. "Make sure every detail is accurate. If it is, you'll need to sign at the bottom. Once you sign this, I am obligated to open an investigation. Do you understand?" I read words on the page. They were my words, but seeing them in the cold, black-and-white format of a police report made them seem even more damning. My father, Robert, and my mother, Mary, did knowingly and without my consent use my personal information to secure a fraudulent loans. I thought of my mother's tears and my father's angry, betrayed face. I thought of a lifetime of family Christmases and birthday parties. Then I thought of the crushing weight of a $450,000 debt. I thought of the life Tom and I had planned, the future we deserved. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. I signed my name at the bottom of each page. Detective Miller took the papers back. "Okay, Anna, we'll take it from here. We'll be in touch with the bank and will likely execute a warrant to obtain the original loan documents. A prosecutor from the district attorney's office will probably reach out to you in the coming weeks." We walked out of the police station into the late afternoon sun. I felt strangely light, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from my shoulders, only to be replaced by a profound, aching emptiness. The bond with my family, already fractured, had now been officially severed by my own hand. The fallout was immediate. By the time we got home, my phone had exploded. There were a dozen missed calls from my parents and a string of increasingly frantic and abusive text messages. From Mom, "I can't believe you did this. The bank called, they've frozen the account, you've ruined everything." From Dad, "You'll regret this, Anna. You have made a terrible enemy today." From Chris, "My dream house is gone because of you. I will never forgive you. You are a horrible person." I read each message, my heart aching with a grief so deep it felt like a physical wound. Then, with a shaking finger, I blocked their numbers. All of them. The torrent of abuse stopped, replaced by an unnerving silence. The silence of estrangement. The days that followed were a blur of legal formalities. The bank's fraud department contacted me, and I repeated my story to them. They were efficient and impersonal, but they assured me the loan was frozen and that I would be held harmless. The house sale for Chris had fallen through spectacularly, and the real estate agents were in an uproar. The quiet moments were the hardest. In the evenings, I would find myself staring into space, remembering my dad teaching me how to draw a floor plan when I was a little girl, or my mom baking my favorite cake for my birthday. Were those memories lies? Was their love for me always conditional, always secondary to their love for my brother? The answer, I was beginning to realize, was yes. Their love was conditional on my compliance, on my willingness to be the supporting pillar for my brother's life, no matter the cost to my own. By refusing to play my assigned role, I had broken the unspoken contract of our family. And now, the entire rotten structure was coming down. The months that followed were a slow, painful crawl through the gears of the justice system. The silence from my family was absolute. It was as if the moment I blocked their numbers, they had ceased to exist, and I, in turn, had ceased to exist for them. There were no more angry texts, no attempts at reconciliation, nothing. Just a vast, empty space where my family used to be. Detective Miller kept me updated on the progress of the investigation. The bank had fully cooperated, providing the original loan documents. The signatures, the detective told me, were clearly forged, an amateurish attempt to mimic my handwriting. The district attorney's office officially pressed charges against my parents, 2 counts each of felony bank fraud and aggravated identity theft. The news of their arrest came via a call from Catherine Davis, my lawyer. "The police were very discreet, Anna," she told me gently. "They went to the house this morning. Robert and Mary were taken into custody, processed, and released on bail within a few hours." Even though I knew it was coming, the image of my parents being arrested in their own home, the home I grew up in, sent a shockwave of grief through me. I spent that evening curled up on the sofa, with Tom holding me, as I cried for the parents I had loved, and for the final, undeniable death of the family I thought I had. Faced with an ironclad case against them, my parents accepted a plea deal. The alternative was a lengthy, public, and humiliating trial they were guaranteed to lose. Their sentencing was scheduled 6 months after that fateful Sunday dinner. Tom and I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom, feeling like ghosts at a funeral. I saw them for the first time since I'd walked out their door. They looked diminished. My father, Robert, who had always seemed so large and commanding, was stooped, his face etched with lines of stress and defeat. My mother, Mary, looked frail and lost, her eyes darting around the courtroom, avoiding my gaze. Chris sat. Behind them, his face a sullen mask of resentment. He looked at me once, his eyes full of pure hatred, before turning away. The judge was a stern, older woman who did not mince words. She spoke of the gravity of their crime, the profound violation of trust, not just against a financial institution, but against their own daughter. Because they were first-time offenders and had taken the plea deal, they avoided jail time. But the consequences were still severe. They were sentenced to 5 years of probation. They were ordered to pay a significant fine to the court and full restitution to the bank for the costs of their investigation. The felony conviction meant they now had a permanent criminal record. The financial fallout was catastrophic for them. To pay the fines and their own legal fees, they were forced to sell their house, the one I had grown up in. The profits they had built over a lifetime were wiped out by their greed and arrogance. After the sentencing, we left without a word. There was nothing left to say. The legal chapter was closed, but the emotional one remained wide open. In the year that has passed since that day, I have slowly begun to heal. Tom has been my rock, my constant source of support and love. We started going to therapy, both together and separately, to process the trauma and the grief. My therapist helped me understand a crucial, painful truth. I was mourning a family that had never really existed. The family I remembered was a fantasy I had constructed, a story I told myself to make the reality of the favoritism and emotional neglect more palatable. The real family was the one that sat in that courtroom, willing to sacrifice my entire future for my brother's fleeting desires. Accepting that has been the hardest part, but it has also been the most liberating. I am no longer bound by the invisible chains of filial obligation. I am no longer waiting for their approval or fearing their disappointment. I am free. Chris, I learned through a distant cousin, was forced to get a mundane job in retail. He lives in a small apartment, complaining to anyone who will listen about how I ruined his life. My parents are renting a small condo in a different town, their retirement years not a golden age of leisure, but a quiet, shame-filled existence. Sometimes, a wave of sadness will wash over me at an unexpected moment, when I see a mother and daughter laughing together in a cafe or a father teaching his child something new. I allow myself to feel the sadness, to acknowledge the loss. But then I look at my own life. I look at Tom, at the home we have built, at the plans for the architecture firm I am finally launching next year. My life is my own. It is built on a foundation of integrity, hard work, and mutual respect, not on secrets and lies. They didn't succeed in taking my future. In the end, they only managed to destroy their own. So, for anyone out there who has been made to feel that your worth is tied to your utility, that your purpose is to serve someone else's dream at the expense of your own, I see you. Choosing yourself is not selfish. It is survival. It is the hardest and most important work you will ever do. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.